All right, so what we're going to talk about today is fat intake and how that relates to your hormonal health. So, a lot of people get stuck in this dieting loop of having low fat is going to, kind of springboard them into losing more body fat, but that is not the case. It can actually make things more difficult, and that's what we're going to dive into today. So, first off, let's start out with the low fat myth. So, fat became the enemy kind of in the early 80s, where, the added sugar, the processed food, kind of came onto the scene because for decades, lower fat was sold as the default healthy choice for the majority of folks. Food labels chased to get the fat grams down as low as they possibly could by lowering the serving size, anything that they could do to get that fat to pretty much zero, non-existent. They would do that, and a lot of people, as a byproduct of that, learn to actually fear dietary fat in itself. Fat got blamed for a lot of weight gain that was, just driven by a calorie surplus coming from a lot of those added sugars. Um, because we know that many low fat products in today's world are simply replaced with added sugar. So if something says low fat, you should probably check and see how much added sugar is in that because it's probably on the higher side as well too. And then a big disconnect that a lot of people just don't put two and two together is dietary fat and bodily fat are not the same thing. And then if you look at it from a dieting aspect, cutting fat too aggressively, it doesn't just slow down progression. It actually makes the processes that make fat loss happen. It slows them way down as well too. So fat is not just an energy source. The dietary fat that you intake on a daily basis is raw materials. That's what it is. Your body uses that raw material to build things it cannot make any other way. So hormones like testosterone and estrogen are built from cholesterol and fat. The cell membranes inside of every cell inside of your body rely on fat to stay intact and fluid. Vitamin A, D, E, and K can only be absorbed alongside dietary fat. So if you do take any of those vitamins, it has to be taken with a meal that has anywhere from 10 to 20-ish grams of fat in that particular meal if you want it to be absorbed. And then roughly 60% of your brain at dry weight is from fat, essentially. So, you know, you going low on the dietary fat side of things is essentially just not putting enough fuel in your body for these processes to carry out what they need to do. For example, if you have low dietary fat, your hormones, your testosterone and your estrogen could potentially tank out, right? That's why in a contest prep setting, if you get very, very low on the dietary fat, your hormones will start to taper off, and that's definitely not a good thing. So that's just one thing to keep in mind, as fat is not just an energy source that you ingest. It is purely raw materials that your body is going to use to build other things that it just simply can't make on its own. So when your fat drops out, your hormones drop out too, exactly what we said in the previous slide. So a very low fat intake, if you keep this up for weeks and weeks and weeks and months on end, um, it's going to show up as an indirect symptom within your body, and it's easy to blame other things as the cause for this instead of looking at the actual dietary intake of your fat across the day. So we look at things like, you're constantly tired all the time, you have persistent fatigue, caffeine doesn't work anymore. That could be an issue of a chronically low fat intake. Things like low libido, if you're a female, irregular menstrual cycles, or just none at all. You have mood swings, low motivation. You have brain fog all the time. You're just mentally not tuned in to what you're doing on a day-to-day basis. And then if you look at things like you have dry skin, very brittle hair, joints are always achy all the time. These aren't random symptoms that you're experiencing. It's not a byproduct of just getting old. It's essentially a downstream effect of your hormonal system that just doesn't have enough raw material, aka fat, to make the hormones needed and have that process go smoothly and efficiently. So what you should do is find the floor, not the bare bone minimum that you can personally intake. So now there's a wide range that works for what dietary fat or how much dietary fat that you should have inside of your diet every day. The general guidance is anywhere from 20 to 35% of your total calories come from fat. And most people should never go below 20% below that for an extended amount of time. Even if you're in like a pretty deep, calorie deficit, fat should be your last resort to cut from. Now, there has been times to where, I've had to cut a contest prep client's dietary fat down to very minuscule numbers. But at that point, if you look at it from the standpoint of is this athlete enhanced or are they natural? If they're enhanced, the hormone side of things are taken care of, right? So we don't have to worry about that aspect of things. So that's okay to pull that kind of athlete down a little bit further with their dietary fat. Now, if you're a natural athlete and you're cutting, and even if it's not for a bodybuilding show, right, you're just cutting in general. If you get it too low, obviously getting those hormones down regulated is not going to be ideal for body fat or a reduction at all. So that's one thing to also keep in mind there too. Now, for me personally, generally, I like to keep people in between zero point 0.3 and zero point 0.4 grams times their body weight. I like to start out at zero point 0.3, and then just if I need to work them up, it'll be to about that zero point 0.4 range. Just if it comes to a point of where they need more calories in, but their food volume is very, very high, or their appetite just is not there, that's when adding in dietary fats, because it is so low on the volume side of things, can be a beneficial thing to add in. But you just don't want to get that too high, as you're going to throw off your nutrient partitioning. If you get that percentage too high, you look at your macros across the board. So now, another big thing is the quality of the fat intake in itself. Quality does matter. So if you're just hitting your fat macros for the day, that's all fine and dandy, but it does matter what you're actually making that fat number consist of when you plug it into MyFitnessPal, Chronometer, whatever. We want to have things in there like fatty fish, walnuts, flax seeds, and all those are going to have those good omega 3s. That's going to support recovery and mood. I do one of the very few supplements that I have my clients actually take is omega 3. You know, sorry, is like fish oil pills, essentially omega 3s, just because we want to cover all the bases on that. Granted, you can have too much, right? But for the most part, I think everybody should be supplementing with a fish oil pill and make sure that it's high quality. Typically, in this area, cheaper is not always better. Just make sure it's a good high quality fish oil that has enough DHEA in it, EPA as well too. And then if we look at olive oil, avocado oil, nuts, things like avocados, or not avocados, almonds, walnuts, again, things of that nature too. All those are going to be good mono unsaturated fats. And then things like egg yolks, egg whites for cholesterol, and then obviously keep the um, the amount of fried foods and heavily processed foods, fat, for sure, into the smallest piece of the equation, right? Like for some reason, everybody loves, like having muffins or the buffins or the Pop Tarts and for like post workout meals and things like that, right? But a lot of those have a ton of fats in them, and I'm just not a huge fan of utilizing those post workout for one reason. Too much fat is going to slow digestion down. But number two, like the quality of what you're actually putting into your body should actually matter to you. So, if you really want to like get down to the nitty gritty of it, 45% of that should be that mono unsaturated, 30% is polysaturated, and then that 25% is going to be saturated like dairy, meat, eggs, things of that nature. So, biggest thing with all of this though, is that a lot of people think that fat is the bad guy. I've had several clients in the several years ago that thought that their fat intake was just too high and they wanted to lower their fat intake to hence maybe make body fat come off a little quicker. And that's such a skewed way of thinking that is it's honestly very completely wrong. You got to make sure that you stay within that good healthy percentage of the dietary fat intake, and just make sure that it's a good quality as well too. I don't want you filling up your macros with Doritos, Pop Tarts. What else has a lot of fat in it? Like those, um, the butters that you get from Walmart, like the sugar cookie stuff, like all that junk processed fat stuff. Like, yes, it does have a fat number, but obviously we want to keep the quality as high as we possibly can for something like that. So